Hey people, get ready to crush everyday TOEFL iBT tests for all modules and make your dreams come true. I'm your motivator and I'll be guiding you through the test prep videos. So don't forget to like, share, and subscribe or you'll be missing out on some serious preparation.
Do you prefer learning from books or from experience? Explain why. Begin speaking now.
I prefer learning from experience because I think it is more better than books. When I do things by myself, I can understand more. For example, when I was learning cooking, I read a book but I didn't understand. But when I cooked by myself, I learned fast. Books are also good, but sometimes they are boring and hard to understand. Experience make me feel excited and I remember things for a long time. So I think experience is more important for learning. Books are okay too, but experience is the best way for me to learn new things.
I prefer learning from experience rather than from books, and there are two main reasons for this. First, when we learn by doing, we can understand concepts more deeply. For example, I learned how to ride a bicycle not by reading instructions but by actually practicing every day. This hands-on approach helped me develop real skills quickly. Second, learning from experience is more memorable. When I make mistakes in real situations, I remember the lessons much longer than information I read in a textbook. Of course, books provide useful background knowledge, but I believe that practical experience gives us the ability to apply what we know in real life. That is why I prefer experiential learning.
I strongly prefer learning through direct experience over relying solely on books, and I believe this preference is supported by both personal observation and educational research. To begin with, experiential learning engages multiple senses simultaneously, which significantly deepens comprehension and long-term retention. When I studied abroad during my undergraduate years, for instance, I acquired more conversational fluency in 3 months of immersion than in 2 years of classroom instruction. Furthermore, learning from experience cultivates critical thinking and adaptability, skills that textbooks rarely develop on their own. Encountering real-world challenges forces learners to synthesize knowledge creatively rather than simply recall memorized information. That said, I acknowledge that books provide the theoretical framework necessary for contextualizing our experiences. Ultimately, however, it is direct experience that transforms abstract knowledge into genuine, applicable understanding.
Effective August 1, 2026, University Transportation Services will implement several modifications to the campus shuttle schedule. Evening service will be extended until midnight, up from the previous 10 p.m. cutoff, to better accommodate students with late-night academic commitments. Additionally, shuttle frequency during peak hours, 8 to 10 a.m. and 3 to 5 p.m. on weekdays, will increase from every 20 minutes to every 10 minutes to reduce overcrowding. However, due to ongoing budget constraints, weekend afternoon service between 1 p.m. and 4 p.m. will be suspended indefinitely. Students requiring transportation during that window are encouraged to use the city bus service. For further details, visit the Transportation Services portal or contact the Student Services Office. 2 students, a male and a female, discuss the announcement outside the student union. The male student shares his personal reaction to the changes, expressing both approval and frustration depending on how each change affects his weekly routine. The male student has a mixed reaction to the announcement. He is pleased about the extended evening service because he regularly studies in the library past 10 o'clock and previously had no way to get home, so the midnight cutoff solves a real problem for him. However, he is frustrated about the suspension of weekend afternoon service because he relies on the Saturday afternoon shuttle to run grocery errands, and he feels the city bus is a much less convenient alternative. The student expresses an opinion about the announcement. State the opinion and explain the reasons given. Begin speaking now.
The student talk about the new shuttle schedule. He thinks some parts are good and some are bad. He like that the shuttle now go until midnight because he study late at the library and before he have no way to go home after 10 o'clock. This is very helpful for him. But he not happy about the weekend afternoon change. He say he usually go to grocery store on Saturday afternoon and now he cannot use the shuttle. He must find other way to go there. So the student have mixed feeling about this announcement. Some change help him but other change make his life more difficult on weekends.
The male student has a mixed opinion about the university's new shuttle schedule. On one hand, he supports the extension of evening service until midnight. He explains that he often stays in the library studying until very late and previously had trouble getting home because the shuttle stopped running at 10 o'clock. The later cutoff directly solves this problem for him. On the other hand, he is unhappy about the cancellation of weekend afternoon service. He mentions that he normally takes the Saturday afternoon shuttle to go grocery shopping, and now he will have to find another option, which he sees as inconvenient. Overall, while he welcomes the evening change, he feels the weekend suspension has a negative impact on his daily routine.
The male student expresses a nuanced, mixed reaction to the university's revised shuttle schedule. With respect to the extended evening service, he is genuinely enthusiastic, explaining that he frequently remains in the library well past 10 o'clock to complete research assignments and has repeatedly found himself stranded on campus with no means of transportation. The new midnight cutoff directly resolves this recurring inconvenience, making it a significant improvement from his perspective. However, he voices clear frustration over the elimination of weekend afternoon service. He notes that Saturday afternoons are when he typically runs essential errands, particularly grocery shopping, and that without the shuttle he will be compelled to rely on the city bus system, which he considers substantially less convenient and far more time-consuming. In sum, while he views the evening extension as a meaningful upgrade, he regards the weekend suspension as a reduction in service quality that disproportionately burdens students without personal vehicles.
Mercantilism was the prevailing economic theory in Europe from roughly the 16th through the 18th centuries. Its central premise held that a nation's wealth depended on accumulating precious metals, particularly gold and silver, by maintaining a favorable balance of trade, that is, exporting more than it imported. To achieve this, governments imposed high tariffs on foreign goods, subsidized domestic industries, and tightly regulated trade with their colonies. Colonies served a dual purpose, supplying raw materials cheaply and consuming the manufactured goods produced by the mother country. Mercantilist policies prioritized national economic power over individual or global prosperity, and they heavily influenced European colonial expansion during this era. The professor lectures on mercantilism, using Britain's Navigation Acts and its trade relationship with the American colonies as a concrete historical example of mercantilist policy in action. The professor explains that Britain's Navigation Acts required American colonists to sell raw materials, such as tobacco and timber, exclusively to Britain at controlled prices, then buy finished manufactured goods back from British merchants at a premium. This arrangement ensured wealth continuously flowed into Britain's treasury. The professor notes that colonists were legally prohibited from trading with other nations, perfectly illustrating how the mother country exploited colonies to maintain a favorable trade surplus. Using the example from the lecture, explain the concept of mercantilism as described in the reading. Begin speaking now.
The reading says mercantilism is about countries getting gold and silver by selling more than buying. The professor talks about Britain and American colonies. Britain made rules so colonies had to sell things to Britain only and buy from Britain. This shows mercantilism because Britain got more money. The colonies couldn't trade with other places. So Britain kept wealth for itself.
According to the reading, mercantilism is an economic theory where a country tries to build wealth by exporting more than it imports, often by controlling colonial trade. The professor illustrates this with Britain's Navigation Acts. Under these laws, American colonists were required to sell raw materials like tobacco only to Britain at low prices and then buy manufactured goods back from Britain at higher prices. This kept wealth flowing into Britain, which is exactly what mercantilism describes, the mother country using colonies to maintain a trade surplus. However, the speaker doesn't fully explain why colonists couldn't trade elsewhere.
The reading describes mercantilism as an economic theory, dominant from the 16th to 18th centuries, in which a nation's wealth was measured by its accumulation of gold and silver. Governments achieved this by exporting more than they imported, using colonies as sources of cheap raw materials and captive markets for manufactured goods. The professor's example of Britain's Navigation Acts perfectly illustrates this concept. Under these acts, American colonists were legally required to sell raw materials such as tobacco and timber exclusively to Britain at suppressed prices, and then purchase finished manufactured goods solely from British merchants at a premium. This arrangement guaranteed a continuous flow of wealth into Britain's treasury, with colonists prohibited from trading with any other nation. Together, the reading and lecture show how mercantilist policy was not simply a theory but a legally enforced system designed to maximize national wealth at the colony's expense.
A professor in a medical science course delivers a lecture on vaccine development, covering two main points. 1. How vaccines exploit the immune system's memory response to create lasting protection, and 2. The multi-phase clinical trial process required before a vaccine can be approved for public use, using the mRNA COVID-19 vaccine as a reference example throughout. The professor first explains that vaccines work by introducing a harmless antigen, such as a weakened pathogen or, in the case of mRNA vaccines, genetic instructions, that trains the immune system to recognize and remember a threat without causing disease. If the real pathogen appears later, memory B and T cells mount a rapid, targeted defense. Second, the professor outlines the three phases of clinical trials. Phase 1 tests safety in a small group, Phase 2 evaluates immune response in a broader population, and Phase 3 confirms efficacy and monitors side effects across tens of thousands of participants. The mRNA COVID-19 vaccine is cited as an example that completed all three phases in under a year due to overlapping trials and unprecedented global resources. Using points and examples from the lecture, explain vaccine development. Begin speaking now.
The professor talks about how vaccines work and how they are tested. Vaccines help the immune system learn about a disease without getting sick. The body remembers and can fight it later. Also, there are three trials, first small group, then bigger, then very big group. The COVID vaccine is one example. It was made very fast. These are the two main points from the lecture about vaccine making.
The professor explains vaccine development using two main points. First, vaccines work by introducing a harmless form of a pathogen, or in the case of mRNA vaccines, genetic instructions, so the immune system can learn to recognize it. Memory cells are then formed, allowing the body to respond quickly if exposed to the real disease later. Second, the professor describes the clinical trial process, which has 3 phases. Phase 1 tests safety with a small group, Phase 2 tests immune response with more people, and Phase 3 tests efficacy with a very large population. The professor uses the mRNA COVID-19 vaccine as an example, noting it completed all phases quickly because trials overlapped and resources were exceptional.
In the lecture, the professor explains vaccine development through 2 interconnected points. First, she describes the immunological basis of vaccines, by introducing a harmless antigen, either a weakened pathogen or, as with mRNA vaccines, genetic instructions that prompt cells to produce a viral protein. Vaccines teach the immune system to recognize a threat without causing illness. The immune system responds by generating memory B and T cells, which remain in the body and enable a rapid, targeted defense if the actual pathogen is ever encountered. Second, the professor outlines the rigorous clinical trial process vaccines must undergo before approval. Phase 1 assesses safety in a small cohort, Phase 2 evaluates the strength and consistency of the immune response in a larger and more diverse group, and Phase 3 confirms real-world efficacy and monitors for rare side effects across tens of thousands of participants. The professor uses the mRNA COVID-19 vaccine as a compelling example, noting that while the standard timeline for vaccine development spans over a decade, this vaccine completed all 3 phases in under a year, made possible by overlapping trial phases and an unprecedented mobilization of global scientific and financial resources. Together, these points illustrate that modern vaccine development is both a sophisticated biological strategy and a highly structured regulatory process.
Hey people, how was your test? Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, or you'll be missing out on some serious fun. See you tomorrow!